In 32 years of studying air power, I have learned that the single most consequential military advantage in modern warfare is not the most expensive to build. It is the most expensive to lose. Air superiority, the condition in which one side controls the airspace above a battlefield sufficiently to conduct its own air operations without prohibitive interference while denying the same freedom to its adversary, has been the foundational assumption behind every American and Israeli military operation in this region for the last 40 years. Every ground offensive, every strike package, every evacuation operation, and every resupply mission has been planned on the belief that American and Israeli aircraft control the skies above the battlefield. According to this analysis, that assumption ended tonight. At 7:23 p.m. local time, the first phase of a Russian air transfer operation, carried out over 72 hours of continuous cargo and ferry flights, reportedly arrived at Shahid Nojeh Air Base near Hamadan in western Iran. The transfer allegedly included 300 frontline Russian combat aircraft, including Su-35S air superiority fighters, Su-34 strike aircraft, and MiG-31BM interceptors, along with their weapon systems, electronic warfare equipment, missile loadouts, and Russian technical personnel needed to integrate them into Iranian military infrastructure. The argument presented is that this development fundamentally changes the regional air balance that American and Israeli planners have relied upon for decades. In Tel Aviv, Israeli Air Force commanders are reportedly conducting urgent operational assessments because Israeli air doctrine assumes that any newly introduced enemy air capability must be challenged before it becomes fully integrated into an operational defense network. According to this theory, Israel now faces a limited window, estimated at 24 hours, before these aircraft become fully coordinated with Iran's radar systems, communications infrastructure, and command and control architecture. Once that integration is complete, the operational environment would permanently change. The analysis focuses on four major questions. First, what exactly has Russia transferred, and why do the Su-35S, Su-34, and MiG-31BM represent a major qualitative shift in Iran's air power rather than simply an increase in aircraft numbers? Second, why does Israel allegedly have only 24 hours before the strategic balance changes? Third, what would the loss of American and Israeli air superiority over the Persian Gulf and Eastern Mediterranean actually mean for future military operations? And fourth, how will Washington respond to a development that could alter the military balance across the region? The argument claims that the combination of these aircraft types creates a layered and coordinated air warfare capability. The Su-35S is described as Russia's most advanced operational air superiority fighter, capable of challenging aircraft such as the F-15, F-16, and F-35 through advanced radar systems, long-range missiles, and sustained supersonic flight capability. Iran's existing fleet of aging American-era fighters and older Russian aircraft has historically lacked the ability to seriously contest Israeli air operations. According to this analysis, the addition of 120 Su-35S fighters would not guarantee victory against the Israeli Air Force, but it would force Israel to operate under conditions it has never previously experienced, where its aircraft could face credible resistance in contested airspace. The Su-34 is presented as a major enhancement to Iran's strike capabilities. Unlike drones and ballistic missiles, which are most effective against fixed infrastructure, the Su-34 provides precision strike capability against mobile targets, advancing forces, and dynamically changing battlefield conditions. With a combat radius of approximately 1,100 kilometers, these aircraft could theoretically reach military targets throughout Israel, American bases across the Gulf region, and naval forces operating in nearby waters. The MiG-31BM, meanwhile, is described as the key area denial platform in the package. Designed for long-range interception and high-speed patrol operations, the MiG-31BM can reportedly threaten surveillance and command aircraft such as the RC-135, E-8 Joint Stars, and E-3 Sentry platforms that American air operations rely upon for battlefield awareness. According to the argument, this would force American intelligence and airborne command aircraft farther away from Iranian airspace, reducing the effectiveness of American and Israeli operations throughout the region. The 24-hour window discussed in the analysis is tied to the process of integrating these aircraft into Iran's military command structure. While the aircraft themselves may already be combat ready, full operational effectiveness requires coordination with radar networks, communication systems, and tactical planning procedures. Iranian planners would reportedly need time to establish sortie schedules, fuel and weapons distribution plans, and airspace management procedures capable of safely integrating 300 additional aircraft into existing operations without creating confusion, collisions, or friendly fire risks. According to this perspective, Israel's opportunity to strike would exist before this process is completed. Once the aircraft are fully integrated into Iran's defensive network, the strategic and operational risks of any Israeli air campaign would increase dramatically, permanently altering the military balance in the Middle East. The Russian advisory personnel must establish the communication protocols and operational interfaces that allow Iranian commanders to effectively operate weapon systems whose tactical characteristics differ significantly from the aircraft Iran has previously used. This integration process takes time. According to the analysis, intelligence assessments based on earlier Russian deployments to Syria and previous Russian equipment transfers to regional partners suggest that basic operational capability would require 24 to 48 hours, while complete operational integration would take 72 to 96 hours. The 24-hour window described here is the period during which the transferred aircraft are physically present inside Iran, but not yet fully connected to Iran's wider air operations network. During this time, Israeli strike options theoretically exist that would become much more difficult after integration is completed. The analysis specifically points to possible airfield suppression strikes against the Iranian bases where the aircraft are currently concentrated before the aircraft are dispersed into hardened shelters and before Iranian air defense systems fully recognize their identification signatures. Once integration is complete, the strategic environment changes significantly. 300 combat aircraft spread across multiple protected air bases and supported by a fully integrated air defense network would create a far more difficult operational challenge for Israel, particularly without direct American support and under conditions created by full Su-35 integration. According to this perspective, the window is real, it is rapidly closing, and the decision being considered in underground Israeli command facilities could become one of the most consequential military choices in Israel's modern history. The operational limits on any Israeli strike are presented as equally important as the opportunities. Israeli aircraft operating against targets near Hamadan in western Iran would need aerial refueling to complete the mission and safely return because the target area is roughly 1,400 kilometers from Israeli territory. Israel's tanker fleet is limited, and its ability to support a large-scale strike package capable of suppressing 300 aircraft spread across several Iranian bases is described as a serious operational constraint. Normally, American tanker aircraft such as the KC-135 and KC-46 would extend Israel's strike range and support a larger attack package, but according to this argument, American political and strategic limitations have prevented that kind of support throughout the broader conflict. The question therefore becomes whether Israel has the independent military capability to exploit this short window and whether it is willing to accept the escalation risks of doing so without the American backing that previous operations of this scale depended upon. The analysis then argues that the loss of American and Israeli air superiority is not merely a reduction in capability, but a complete doctrinal disruption. Military planning in the region has allegedly depended on the assumption that American and Israeli aircraft could operate freely in the air. Without that assumption, every military mission changes fundamentally. Strike operations against Iranian targets, for example, have historically relied on the expectation that aircraft could fly to their objectives, attack, and return without facing a serious opposing air force. Su-35S fighters contesting the air corridor would not make such missions impossible, but they would make them far more expensive in terms of escort fighters, electronic warfare support, and long-range missile usage. Escort requirements reduce the number of aircraft available for actual strike missions, while missile inventories are limited and require time to replenish. According to the argument, strike operations could still occur, but not at the speed or scale current American and Israeli planning assumes. Reconnaissance operations would also become more difficult. The American intelligence network that supports military operations depends heavily on airborne surveillance aircraft operating near Iranian airspace. The MiG-31BM's long-range interception capability could force those aircraft farther away from Iranian territory, reducing intelligence quality, responsiveness, and coverage. The analysis claims that operations conducted with a degraded intelligence picture become riskier and less effective. Resupply and evacuation missions would also face new challenges. American forces in Iraq currently depend on air corridors protected by American air superiority. According to this argument, those routes would now pass through contested airspace where Su-34 aircraft could threaten transport operations. Resupply aircraft without fighter escorts would become vulnerable, while assigning fighter escorts to every transport mission would consume valuable combat aircraft needed elsewhere. The same issue would affect American naval aviation. Carrier strike groups already positioned farther away because of missile threats would now also face the challenge of Su-34 strike aircraft operating within range of their positions. As a result, the operational space available to American naval forces in the region would continue shrinking. The discussion then turns to Washington's response, or lack of response, to the Russian aircraft transfer. According to the analysis, American intelligence detected the transfer early through satellite monitoring of Russian aircraft departing bases in Russia's southern military district. Ferry flight routes, cargo aircraft carrying support equipment, and Russian technical personnel moving into Iran were reportedly visible well before the operation was completed. Yet no military or diplomatic action was taken to stop it. The explanation offered is that the transferred aircraft were still operated by Russian personnel during the flights and supported by Russian crews on Iranian soil. Any attempt to intercept the transfer, strike the aircraft, or threaten the operation militarily would therefore risk direct confrontation with Russian personnel. In a DEFCON 3 environment, the analysis argues that no American administration would accept the danger of escalation that such a confrontation could create. According to this interpretation, the transfer was designed specifically to exploit that reality. The aircraft themselves were important, but equally important was the strategic effect of demonstrating that Russian military assets could be moved into the region under conditions where American intervention would be politically and strategically impossible. The analysis claims that this pattern reflects a broader Russian strategy aimed not at direct military victory, but at creating American strategic paralysis. Previous developments mentioned in the series, including missile deployments, nuclear signaling, and weapons transfers, are described as steps designed to weaken American military flexibility while staying below the threshold that would trigger direct conflict between the United States and Russia. According to this view, the methodology is highly effective because it exploits the fear of nuclear escalation while gradually limiting American military options without requiring Russia to openly enter the conflict itself. The discussion also suggests that Chinese military planners are likely studying this model carefully. The idea of transferring advanced aircraft or military systems to allied regional partners under conditions where American intervention would risk direct confrontation with Chinese personnel could theoretically be applied in the Pacific. The analysis argues that tonight's events provide proof that such a strategy can work if the transfer timeline is compressed and the escalation risks are high enough to discourage American action. In Gulf capitals such as Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, the reported shift in air power is presented as a major strategic concern. Gulf states that invested heavily in American defense systems, including Patriot missiles, THAAD systems, and fleets of F-15 and F-16 aircraft, would now be reassessing their security position in light of an Iranian air capability strengthened by Su-34 strike aircraft operating within range of Gulf infrastructure. According to the argument, growing doubts about American willingness or ability to respond decisively could push Gulf governments toward deeper security discussions with Beijing. The overall conclusion is that the military balance in the Middle East has been built for decades on one central assumption: American and Israeli aircraft controlled the skies. Every major operation, whether ground warfare, naval activity, airstrikes, or evacuations, depended on that assumption. The arrival of 300 Russian aircraft in Iran, according to this perspective, has not necessarily ended that dominance, but it has created a contested air environment where air superiority would now have to be actively fought for rather than simply assumed. Israel is portrayed as facing a limited period in which it must decide whether to strike before the balance changes permanently, while Washington has demonstrated that it is unwilling to intervene directly under current conditions. The argument concludes by claiming that Russia has developed a strategy capable of weakening American military power without triggering the direct confrontation that nuclear deterrence is meant to prevent, describing it as one of the most significant strategic innovations of the modern era.